Yes, sir, and then I will come to you. Yes, go ahead.
My question, I think everybody can hear me.
We'll come just in case.
Okay. The first thing, the biggest problem this country is dealing with at the present time is our huge debt, and that needs to be dealt with. But with that said, I'd like to know what your policy is going to be on the space program and space exploration.
So you're right, our debt is a huge problem, and it's particularly a huge problem for the young people sitting in this room, because it is their debt more than it's yours and mine. How is it, so we're now $18 trillion worth of debt. That's what we have. Ask yourself this question: how is it possible that the United States government spends more money each and every year and has done so for 50 years, and yet we never have enough money to do the important things? Have you ever noticed that? No matter what the issue is, everybody says we need more money. So if you say we really do need to invest in space exploration, by the way, yes, we do. Why do we? Because the Chinese are, the Russians are, the Japanese are. Space is an important frontier. We need to lead there, but we don't have enough money, supposedly. Or if your issue is we need to secure the border, we don't have enough money. I'd like my questions answered on tax day. Remember when the IRS told us this year, we don't have enough money to man the 800 thing, 800 phone banks? We never have enough money, and yet we spend more money each and every year. How is that possible? It is because all the money is spoken for. This is why we have to go to zero-based budgeting, because all the money that we spend, do you know how an appropriations hearing happens in Washington, D.C. today? You don't ever talk about the whole budget. No. You don't ever examine the whole budget. No. All you talk about is the rate of increase over last year's budget. And if any of you have ever done business with the federal government, and I have in my years in technology and communications, you know that in the last 6 to 8 weeks of every fiscal year, what happens? If you're contracting with the federal government, hold out your money bag, because they're spending money like crazy, whether they need to or not. Why? Because they don't ever want to be asked the question, can you do it with less? We must go to zero-based budgeting so we can examine every dollar, cut every dollar, move any dollar. The only way you reduce debt and deficits is to reduce spending, grow the economy. Reduce spending, grow the economy. The good news is, if we reduce spending in the right way, we can grow the economy. Example, I mentioned a 73,000-page tax code. So complicated, nobody can understand it anymore without hiring armies of accountants and lawyers. And so its very complexity benefits the wealthy, the big, the powerful. Anybody who can hire all those armies of lawyers and accountants is benefited. It has to go to about 3. But guess what? If we take a 73,000-page tax code and put it to 3, not only do we help lift a burden off of all those small businesses who are the main job creators in this nation, small businesses like the one I started out in, create 2/3 of the new jobs, they employ half the people. We're crushing them. Not only do we lift the burden of that complicated tax scheme off of small businesses, but what else do we do? You need a whole lot less IRS agents. If all you have is a 3-page tax code, and on this day, in this period of time when we are all so sensitive to the dangers that surround us, do you know that we have more IRS agents than we have CIA and FBI combined? Wow. So we have to reduce spending, and we have to grow the economy. And if we reduce spending in the right way, we will grow the economy. And then you can prioritize. You can prioritize. We must have the strongest military on the face of the planet, and everybody has to know it. We must invest there. That includes, by the way, leading in new technologies like space technology. But you can't prioritize and you can't invest if all the money is spoken for. One last point on this. Would it surprise you if I told you that there's a bill to go to zero-based budgeting sitting on the House floor? There is. It's not getting voted on. There's a bill, there has been a plan to go to a 3-page tax code around for 20 years. See, nobody wants to challenge the status quo. So I'm going to ask you for your help. As your president, I'm going to ask you for your help. I want to get that zero-based budgeting bill passed finally. And you know how we get things passed in Congress? We put pressure on the political process. And you know how I'm going to ask you to put pressure on the political process? I'm going to ask every single one of you to take out your smartphones. Take them out, and I will ask you a question. The president has a weekly radio address. I'm going to go into the Oval Office, and in my weekly radio address, I will say, please take out your smartphones. Do you agree with me that we should go to zero-based budgeting? Do you think Congress ought to pass that bill? Press 1 for yes. Press 2 for no. There actually is an app for this. This technology exists. If you have a flip phone, you can't play, so you need to upgrade. But the point is, we can get this done, but it needs the kind of leadership in the Oval Office that is not afraid to challenge the system, and you as citizens will have to help me. Yes, sir. Whatever you like. I can hear you, but make sure everybody else can hear you.
Hi. As president, what would you do to make American energy cheaper, cleaner, and more reliable?
Great question. So first, we must be the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century. We must be. Why? Because we have the resources, because we have the capacity, because we have the technology, because we have the know-how, and oh, by the way, it'll be a lot better for the environment. Now, if we are the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century, here's what happens. First of all, we create millions of jobs. Second of all, we export our resources around the world. Picture this situation. Today, Iran can now export its oil. Russia exports oil, Venezuela exports oil, OPEC exports oil. At least two of those people I just mentioned, Iran and Russia, are clearly adversaries. The oil that they export is heavy, sour, dirty crude. American producers produce light, sweet, cleaner burning crude. It's better for the environment. American producers are prevented from exporting by law. But Iran and Russia are going along exporting. So now, does that make any sense? We have Iran and Russia, who are enemies, gaining money and power around the world by exporting energy that is dirtier burning than the energy that we could export from this nation, which would be cleaner, better for the environment, and create jobs. One of the things that people say, and we have a global warming climate change conference going on in Turkey today with the nations of the G20, and I know that young people are very concerned about the environment, as you should be. I am too. We have to preserve our planet. The problem is most people don't ever read the fine print of the science. The fine print of the science, all the scientists who tell us that global warming and climate change is man-made also tell us this. A single nation acting alone can make no difference at all. In fact, to make a difference with current technology will require a 30-year effort, globally coordinated and costing trillions of dollars. There is no chance that's going to happen, folks. China has not agreed to shut down a single coal-fired power plant. They're building 4 new ones every single week. So while we're in Turkey having a conference, the reality is nothing's changing. The only thing that changes intractable problems is innovation. So in addition to being the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century because we'll create jobs, in addition to being the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century because we will take power away from the bad guys, in addition to being the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century because it's better for the environment, we need to be the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century so that we have industries strong enough to innovate. When we weaken our own industries, there is no one else more innovative than this nation. There is no one more technologically sophisticated than this nation. And so when we begin to wound ourselves, as this administration is doing through its regulation, we are curbing our ability to innovate, not just on behalf of our own citizens, but on behalf of the world. The last thing that I would say on this is it is easy to say coal is bad, just as one example, coal is bad, let's shut coal down. That's what President Obama is doing. That's what the EPA regulations are doing. The Clean Power Plan that the EPA just rolled back will make energy more expensive for middle-class families. It's easy to say that, but then consider for a moment that our coal plants are far cleaner than the Chinese coal plants. And travel someday, if you think that the environment is more important than people's livelihood, travel someday to some of these communities in Kentucky or West Virginia and look at what 40% unemployment looks like. Look at the devastation that it wreaks in communities, in drug abuse, in family abuse. People need to work. And when we take people's jobs away, not at the altar of science, but at the altar of ideology, which is what this is, it's a tragedy for them and for our nation. Yes, ma'am. Yes, The Moral Cause for Fossil Fuels. I've read that book, actually.
I bought it for my husband. He loved it. I'm now reading it. I think every college student today should read that book. My question to you is, why can't the government protect our personal information?
Why can't the government protect our personal information? You know, I used a word in my remarks that was pretty strong. I talked about ineptitude. Ineptitude. That's the answer. Sadly, that is the answer. Look, I've spent a lot of my life around bureaucracies, cutting them down to size, holding them accountable. I can tell you what happens if you give a bureaucracy more money year after year, and there is no consequence for non-performance. I'm now describing the federal government, ladies and gentlemen. More money every year, no consequence for non-performance. What you're going to get over time is ineptitude. Ineptitude. So let's just talk about what happened in the Office of Personnel Management, okay? Here's what happened, and I know this, having, as I say, chaired the advisory board at the Central Intelligence Agency. We have known that the Chinese were trying to hack into our most sensitive government databases and systems. We've known that for 12 years. This is not a surprise. We've known it. And so we should have been preparing for it. In fact, the Office of Personnel Management had 2 warnings by their own Inspector General about major gaping holes in their security, and they just didn't fix them. If you went and looked at the Office of Personnel Management, they didn't even have the most basic 2-step authentication processes in place that everybody in the private sector does. It's called ineptitude. It's why bureaucracies have to be cut down to size. It's why, in addition to zero-based budgeting, so we know where all the money is and you can assign metrics, are you meeting metrics or not? If you're not, you don't get the money anymore. We have to tackle the seniority system and move to a system of consequence. By the way, I mentioned that citizens can be helpful to me. Let me tell you why I know that works. Do you remember the VA scandal, the wait times in Arizona? Remember that? And everybody was so outraged, and the American citizens put huge pressure on the government, said, this is terrible. We can't have veterans dying before they get an appointment, and we can't have bureaucrats cooking the books so they cover it up, which is what was happening. So the American people were so outraged, they flooded Congress with phone calls and emails and all the rest, and guess what? Congress acted. In 3 weeks, they passed a bill, a bipartisan bill, that said you could fire the top 400 senior executives at the VA. We need to apply that all throughout government. By the way, less than a handful have been fired. But the point is, pressure works. So I'm going to use technology to apply pressure to the political process over and over and over again. Ineptitude. Now, what we need to do, we need to stand up. What I would do is stand up a central command for cybersecurity, because technology is a tool, for sure, that I can use to re-engage citizens in government, but it's a weapon that's being used against us over and over and over. We are the most technologically sophisticated nation in the world. China cannot beat us if we get our act together, but we got to get our act together. And the only way we're going to do that is to cut this bureaucracy down to size, hold it accountable, which is why we need a different kind of leadership in the Oval Office. Yes, ma'am. Yep.
I'd like to I'd like to ask you about your role as one of the 2 female presidential candidates who are running for arguably the most powerful position in our government. You have the unique opportunity to be a positive and influential role to young women across the country. How would you explain to them that if you were president, you would limit their access to reproductive health services by supporting the defunding of Planned Parenthood, an organization that provides low-cost reproductive health care and a plethora of additional health resources?
So, I find it interesting that people are so unaware that Planned Parenthood actually offers less health services than either community health centers or pregnancy centers, both of which Hillary Clinton and most Democrats refuse to have funded by taxpayers. So I don't really think this is about women's health, actually. And I also believe that most people, whether they're pro-life or pro-choice, understand that we cannot have a taxpayer-funded organization engaging in changing abortion techniques or late-term abortion techniques for the purposes of harvesting body parts. We can't have that. And that's not about being pro-choice or pro-life. Yes, ma'am, you had a question in the back. Did you have a question? If you don't, it's okay. I'll go on.
As a future educator, I'm concerned about the reduction of teacher salaries. How are you planning to ensure that teachers receive adequate pay and that the amount does not decrease any further?
Yeah. I think the right way to start that question is to say, because it's easy to say, oh, government should fix that. In particular, the federal government should fix that. But in truth, I think what ails our education system is too much federal government in too many things. So let me try and make that case for you. The funding for the Department of Education has increased for the last 40 years, and the quality of our education has gone down. Many young people are concerned about skyrocketing student debt. You should be. The student loan debt problem has increased by 50% under President Obama. Do you know why? Most people don't know that buried in the pages of the Affordable Care Act is the takeover of the student loan industry by the federal government. The student loan industry is now controlled by the federal government, something most people don't know when they're taking out a loan. And the federal government now determines the interest you're going to pay on that loan. And generally, the rate is somewhere between 4.5% and 6.5%. Meanwhile, the government pays interest on its debt at somewhere between 1.5% and 2.5%. In other words, the government's making money off of you. If it sounds like a racket, it's because it is. And instead of having a competitive industry where people actually have to compete for your business, you're captured by the federal government. I come from the technology industry, and you love technology as do all your peers, and so you know what you've come to expect from the technology industry. You've come to expect better prices, better feature function year after year after year. Why? Because it's the most competitive, least regulated industry in the world. That's why. Competition works. Not only does the federal government tell you what you're going to pay for your student loan and permit no competition for your business, which does not serve you, but serves the government, not only have they done that, but think about the role the government has played over the years as the Department of Education has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, they go through expensive regulations and certification processes on universities. Ask any university administrator and they will tell you that the requirements the federal government imposes on them have an impact on cost. Not only that, the federal government, particularly under this administration, has worked hard to get rid of choices. So they're trying to put for-profit universities out of business. They're trying to say everyone should go get a 4-year college degree. Not everyone should. Student loans ought to be available for technical 2-year degrees, for example. But the federal government actually says what kind of education a student loan can be applied to. And they add cost in regulatory and certification requirements. And finally, of course, there's Common Core. You know, Common Core, however it started, Common Core has turned into a bureaucratic program to teach teachers how to teach and students how to learn. And it's not working. So I say all of that to say that in general, we need the federal government less involved in education. That doesn't mean less money to education, but it matters who's spending the money. We actually know what is the most important thing for an education. It's a great teacher, to your point, and a great teacher has to be adequately compensated and rewarded, and it's an involved community and family. And so instead of having all the money up in Washington, D.C., and people being dictated to about how they spend that money, we ought to push more money into communities, more money into states, and give every parent as many choices as possible, so that every kid has as many chances as possible, whether that's a choice over higher education or a choice as to the teacher in the school that their child can attend, whether it's vouchers or magnets or homeschooling. All of that matters. And I will tell you what, if you give parents choices and you give them accountability and you give communities the opportunity, the teachers that are really good are going to get paid a lot more than the teachers who aren't very good. And over time, that is going to make a difference. The federal government cannot fix this. Yes, ma'am. Can we get rid of the EPA? Well, you know, the EPA, if you look at all the rules that the EPA has rolled out, I know that for some people, whoa, Environmental Protection Agency, it must be a good thing, right? Maybe for young people here, it sounds like a good thing. It's a terrible thing. Not only is the EPA destroying industries in this country, it truly is, but the EPA has rolled out in the last several months something called the Waters of the U.S. The EPA, a federal government agency, now controls 95% of the groundwater in this nation. Do you really think that bureaucrats are going to do a good job controlling and managing water? When I was in Iowa this summer, I took a combine ride. Combines are very cool things, by the way. Very high-tech pieces of machinery. And I was way up in the combine cab, and I'm looking at the computer printout, the computer screen of his soybean fields, and across these nice, neat little rows of soybean were these squiggly blue lines. And I said, what are those? He said, oh, those are waterways. I said, oh, are those the waterways the EPA now controls? He said, yes. I said, I'd like to go see one. So we went and saw one. And it was a round patch of grass about this big. It was a round patch of grass about this big. Somewhere under the grass was moisture. And this is now a waterway controlled by the EPA. This farmer has no idea what to do with this law. And I have seen control of water by the federal government devastate farming in the Central Valley of California, which is why food prices are going up, by the way. But ask yourself this, particularly the students in the room. Ask yourself this, who are these bureaucrats? Who are they? They are elected by no one. They are accountable to no one. They are nameless, they are faceless, there is no consequence. So, President Obama has rolled out a whole set of regulations under executive order. I will roll them back, but we also have to make sure this never happens again. So there's another law sitting on the floor of the House that I'm going to ask your help in passing. It's called the RAINS Act. The RAINS Act puts Congress in charge. It says, you know what, you can't just roll out regulations because we're no longer a nation of laws. We've become a nation of rules. Rules just roll out, and we don't know who these rule makers are. And most of the rules are rolled out for ideological reasons, not for economic reasons. Their economic impact is crushing. So the RAINS Act says Congress has to vote on every single one. As you might expect, this act is sitting on the floor of the House. Nobody's voted on it. I'd like it voted on. So I'm going to ask you to get out your smartphones. Would you like the RAINS Act voted on so that your representatives are accountable for the laws that roll out across this nation instead of nameless, faceless bureaucrats?